Integrated information theory is a new idea that attempts to explain consciousness with a whole bunch of math, which is fascinating. You should check it out. As always, references are in the description. Anyways, it suggests that the level of consciousness in any given system is measured by the amount of integrated information that it processes. Which, as I understand it, is to say that at some point, when you get enough information passing between enough things, whether that exchange takes place in the nervous system of a worm, or the algorithms of a digital worm, or the chemical exchange of an ant colony, or the ecology of a forest, or even the trends on the internet, networks become, in a manner of speaking, conscious. That is, they themselves begin to have experiences.
Perhaps the most simple and powerful way to find fundamental laws connecting consciousness to physical processing is to link consciousness to information. Wherever there's information processing, there's consciousness. Complex information processing, like in a human, complex consciousness. Simple information processing, simple consciousness.
That sounds kind of kooky, I know. Integrated information theory hasn't been around long enough to be critically refined, nor widely accepted, and if it were, I'm not sure it would imply that we're all the brain cells of a massive superintelligence that's mostly obsessed with cats. But if we are comfortable playing with it, wondering about it, I think it's a pretty useful mnemonic device for the big idea in episode 7. Because it allows us to at least suppose that these self-organized structures of thought, like trends or movements or organizations, cultures, are quite literally alive. They are memetic organisms. I think it's interesting to think of modern topics from this perspective. Like, for example, the point that Elizabeth Warren made last week, that the proposed defunding of Planned Parenthood is a masquerade, a trait of the Republican Party itself, which has been unwilling to relinquish its grip on the right of a woman's body. And something strange happens when we start to play with this idea, because the disagreement Warren has is not with the individual Republicans, but rather a party, a 161-year-old entity, which is a tangled, self-sustaining collection of values and campaign slogans, financial priorities, corruptions, and cover-ups that is currently passing laws that affect women's health. It also gives an interesting weight to the idea of corporate personhood. For any person, the material rapaciousness would be detestable in our small social circles. But it is an essential quality of any creature whose diet is significantly comprised of capital. I would very much like to challenge you to find other movements that you can characterize this way. I'd like to hear some of your ideas in the comments. An uncomfortable byproduct of playing with this theory for me is when we turn this theory towards religion. It would imply that the organized construction of memes the religious have historically called gods are also, as billboards along the highways have been suggesting for years, very much alive. Now, whether or not that's true, these are complex systems, networked by language and ritual, that through trends of groups and needs of communities exchanged enormous amounts of information across time, so often and so effectively that no one person is capable of controlling them. And so things like cults evolved organs that filter fear and fantasy and vivid denial into a sustenance that maintains its population in the environment of ideas. Something like "thou shalt not have any other gods before me" could be recategorized as a trait that evolved out of self-preservation against other memetic gods, akin to a male lion killing cubs. If we skeptically deconstruct what the Mormons call God, What they reinforce as him is a collection of beliefs from over 15 million people, influenced by millions more from the past 2 centuries. And this system, not any in particular conscious person, but a network of persons, acts in accordance with a very complex pattern of memes that spans the Christian theology that it bred from, particular events that occurred as it grew, and the changing psychologies of the people experiencing them. And this entire system, from start to finish, not any individual part of it, was what organized a campaign in 2008 that led to voters passing Proposition 8. In this way, it acted on its own, and it acted big. Likewise, we could say that the system that some call Allah actually blesses ISIS, and another system with the same name fervently condemns it. And there would be a close relative to certain Christian creatures called American racism, and another called patriarchy that is slowly losing its camouflage and power in an environment that no longer suits it. From this theory, we can play with a sort of arena of neo-polytheism and imagine these other-realmed beings battling out in the forms we've concocted for them, invisibly but all around us, and with very real casualties. Again, and this is important, you can and should correctly classify what I'm suggesting as poetry. This is poetry for anthropologists, or if you prefer, hyperbole for neuroscientists. But for those without this model or this theory to play with, this is called divinity, and it's very real. And whether or not they are right to call it so, the God that certain Mormons believe to be anti-gay, that led their people into Utah, that blesses their families, is a very real string of self-sustaining ideas weaved intricately into their human perspectives that literally motivated anti-gay legislation, unified pioneers, and maintains a community of families. For us, in a progressive culture, these less welcome organisms like patriarchal anti-gay gods and corporate beasts that eat rainforests and shit out billionaires seem like monsters lurking at the bottom of the collective veldt, totally unbeneficial to our thriving. But there have been, let's not forget, plenty of places in the world and in history where equality and environmentalism would have been impossible to conceive of. And so these so-called monsters were favorable constructions, a means to survive and thrive for the groups that created them. We could compare them to the poison of a poisoned dart frog, something we can hardly blame on the character of a frog. Traits adapt. The godly things of the Old Testament alone dance from guidelines of sanitation to war tactics to the social laws of a community to romance and poetry. Atheists like to refer to this as the God of the gaps, which is what they say is a pattern that moves gods from controlling the storms to a friend that helps us find true love. But Karen Armstrong says this about religion.
Our view of religion in the West, in the modern West, which sees religion as a separate, autonomous activity that sealed off from such matters as politics and ordinary life, something that is an internal quest, an internal search for the transcendent, and that doesn't mingle much with secular matters. This is a modern concept developed in the West in the 17th century at the start of our modernity. It's the charter myth of the nation-state, the secular nation-state. But in other cultures, there is no equivalent to that concept of religion.
According to Armstrong, there is a myth of the separateness of religion from secular ideas. Religion is, of course, tangled in everything, and was even more tangled in our belts in the past. Maybe, for example, the advantage of heroism that survived in the culture of Greek gods is still very much alive in America. It just evolved into the Marvel movies. The appeal of mysticism in European witchcraft lives on, distorted, of course, but alive in Harry Potter books and other fantasy. And traits of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism have begun surfacing in our particular secular ways in the popularity of veganism and yoga. There was never a point when we overcame this trend that religion finds itself in. We are still in it. The truest, most reliable things we knew eventually became untrue, and others became more reliable, until their mutations had made them almost unrecognizable. And this is the sort of central doctrine of what philosophy calls induction. And it's something we've explored already, that the truth emerges as it is built upon itself. And so every major movement and revolution of history is in this way a transitional fossil, evolving into nothing in particular. Of course, there is a real danger today that if we aren't active, we could become the failed organs of these conceptual beasts. There are plenty of consumerist or religious or idealistically motivated ideas that act as unsustainable appetites, feeding on our natural resources or our human rights or our mental health. And we could destroy our planet. We could become lost in a harmful radicalism or unknowingly feed into racism, prejudice, or violence. And we are far too big a species now to be lazy about this. Globalization in so many ways has already happened. We no longer live in the isolated rivers and lakes that made these memetic creatures. We live in an ocean, and we are bombarded daily with an amazing diversity of thought. Just being online now, your mind is part of an ecosystem of ideas that is capable of some awful things. But I'd like to suggest that the danger is not that we won't be able to kill these destructive organisms in time. It's that we might not give them enough space to evolve into the creatures we want them to be. There is an exclusivity gene in most ideologies, something that says this is how it should be, and so therefore it cannot be that. But what if the ideology instead was unfinished? A question we keep asking, how should it be, knowing all along that we will never have an answer, just more refined questions. Progress is not uniquely progressive. It occurs in every field that there is, personal or cultural. It is what happens to anything attempting to survive in a world that's changing. And so maybe for us, progress is not hunting down the bad ideas. It's terraforming our collective landscape to give space for each of these conceptual creatures to evolve and thrive without fear of destruction, so that they may climb their way towards something more reliably prosperous. Satire of news, for example, is its own growing creature, with faces like John Oliver and The Daily Show and The Onion, which have features so similar to real news that at times it seems identical. But it is a creature which, thanks to our value of free speech, evolved from its preachy, strong, opinionated relatives into something non-rigid, something malleable. We are free to take it or leave it, and so, much like the scientific method, it's sustainable. And we celebrate this transformation with laughter. And so as we begin to engage more and more with the sort of ugly features of religious traditions or ideologies, as that independently thinking population gains its footing, let's not forget that rigid political correctness and incompassionate skepticism These are hindrances, not qualities of a sustainable environment. Skepticism is not a resolution from the questions posed by religion. It's the opposite. It is an exhaustive, endless pilgrimage in our most personal and our most universal truths. It's a promise to never resolve. I think there is a better way to be, a way to navigate this frontier, every collision with these memetic beasts, with enough tact to domesticate the dangerous issues they create, but allow their wild parts to find their own way. This is an approach I will explore more next time on I Wonder.